So, Dean, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's great to have a kind of a proper chat with you, actually. But when you think about retail media in the UK and you think about how it's professionalised over the years, you stand out as certainly one of the pioneers of that and a leading voice, leading light in the UK industry, certainly, perhaps beyond that. But I'd love to know, how did you get started in retail media?
Yeah, well, hi, Stephen. It's great to be on here. I've been looking forward to this one, and probably a little bit too kind with those comments. But if I zoom back about how I ended up in this role, a lot of people have career plans, don't they? Do you want to target this role, that role? Well, 5 years ago, my role didn't exist. It didn't exist at the co-op, didn't exist in the industry. And I think the people that land themselves in retail media have some similar qualities in the way they broaden their career. So I've always been one that wants to balance comfort and discomfort in a role. I don't want to always just deepen my expertise. I want to balance what I knew in previous roles versus learning in a new one. So I've ended up doing diagonal moves and sideways moves. I've been in B2B agencies at McCann, worked in the public sector for a bit, and then co-op, worked in CRM, brand and membership transformation, media planning, trade planning, loyalty, data transformation, and then retail media. And I always find that those things compound each other. When you look at retail media, what elements does it need? I was fortunate that retail media moved from its home within the co-op, and they thought, let's put it with Dean's team because that seems to make sense on expertise. And I was in the loyalty team where the data, the insights are at the time. But the other thing that's always guided me is not just learning and being able to be curious, is around problems. I like the big problems, and I like the problems that require strategy and business transformation. And loyalty did that, and now retail media has done that. And that kind of leads you down a path of there's no blueprint, so you've got to be curious, you've got to be candid, you've got to ask questions, which is one of the reasons I quite enjoy speaking about retail media, is a lot of the train track hasn't been laid. So the discussions are really insightful. And I think there's lots of people like myself in the industry that are doing it a good service by speaking and sharing their opinions. So that's all I've been doing the last few years, is having a good guess at what I think the industry holds and what Co-op's trying to do to grow.
Well, you certainly described many of the things that make retail media a kind of an exciting place to be. But I'm kind of also curious, how do the co-op see it? What expectations are on you?
I see my role as three things. I've described these before: make it grow, make it work, make it easy. Not necessarily in that order, but there's an accountability for obviously it growing as a business in its own right. It's seen as a business within co-op, whether that's on the P&L or not. It's treated as a startup initially, and now it's becoming more mature within the organization. And then obviously making sure it works. And that's not just growing revenue. That means, is it meeting shopper needs? Is it protecting the consumer experience? Are we delivering for advertisers? Are the benefits holistic? I've seen other retail media networks that grow really fast, really soon. But then when you look at the books, you're just moving money around the business because you're putting a lot of pressure on advertisers or brands over here, and they've just reorganized their P&L with your business. So you need that holistic point of view. And then easy. What you don't want is friction within an organization. Retail media brings in technology, it brings in processes, it brings in talent, it adds to governance, it adds to RACI across an organization. So those three things are always what I've said I'm here to do. And I think when you communicate those internally, it greases the wheels a little bit. Because if you just focus on it's just about revenue, then you might struggle internally with some of the relationships. You also may struggle to balance expectations in investing in ease that might not directly impact the revenue structure. So that's the way I try and have it balanced across the business. And it's all holistic. That's the other thing, is it's not about growing co-op media networks, it's about growing co-op media networks so co-op grows. And those trade-offs need balancing.
Yeah, they very much do. And if I look around, some UK retail media networks, I'm sure it's true also in other markets, report into commercial. Some are part of marketing. Some fit under e-com. How does it work at the co-op?
So if you follow the reporting lines, it's marketing. So we're in...
Is that the right place?
For us, I think it works. I think one of the things I always do is don't assume what's right today is right for tomorrow. So we originally set out on a 5-year strategy for Co-op Media Network, and we review it every 6 months because you learn every 6 months. You learn from performance, you learn from the market, you learn from failures and mistakes. And for instance, when the cyber attack happened last year, we had to pivot. The world was totally different within Co-op, and the way the market evolves is different. So right now, it works. A lot of the ecosystems that retail media is aligned from are marketing ecosystems. So, for instance, we already did advertising on our own websites. We already did advertising in our own email, in our own shops, on our own app. We did that to grow our retail business. A lot of those channels are owned by the marketing team. We're using the same channels. Yep. Brands are funding some of the activity through those channels. Ultimately, the consumer doesn't see brand-funded ads, retailer-funded ads. It just sees ads. So in marketing, I think initially that is the right way to go because it protects the shopper experience. When you're within commercial, it does a lot better job at protecting any cannibalization. What's trade marketing, what's shopper marketing. For us, the most important thing was the experience of members, the experience of shoppers, and then we can make sure through strong relationships internally, other teams are also tightly knit.
So retail media network leaders are completely reliant on the broader business, obviously, whether that's stores, whether it's e-com, whether it's obviously finance, whether it's commercial, because, so much involves suppliers. And I don't think that anybody would say that there's a model that is right, but it looks from the outside as though the Co-op have got a very, very good level of alignment within the business. And now that might just be PR and speaking at conferences, but could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I suppose you don't ever know what you're doing is successful or the right approach until afterwards, right? And our approach that we took is I think successful internally. I think we have really strong relationships with interdependent teams. I think leadership has a lot of support, and we balance that accountability and freedom quite well. And when you think about 2023, which was the year I got retail media into my remit in December 22, Kenyatta as CMO joined the business in January 23, and then we launched in Jan 24. So we had a year of planning and preparation and internal stakeholder management, strategy, everything. We went in. We didn't launch and then figure out what's next. We had a lot of planning, and I think there's a lot of entrants in retail media that just when everyone else is launching, get out to market, figure out the rest, get the cash, and then we'll figure out the strategy as we move. We didn't do that. We were quite disciplined. So I think that's the other thing, is that year of plan. The other thing that I found was important, and there's 3, I think, approaches to getting that internal alignment and support. One is personal motivation. The other is professional relationships. And the last one is infrastructure. And I'll talk about each 3. So personal motivation. So I think individuals around the business have got to be motivated to support Co-op Media Network. And most people are motivated in their roles, I think, if the ambition is bold, it's exciting. I think they believe in the proposition so that they know that what you are promoting and growing is good, it's strong, it has value. And then last is that you have a say in how it's built. And I tried to make sure that all stakeholders across the business had those 3 things, which means they need to understand what we're trying to go. They have to know that it's realistic. They have to value that our convenience proposition has got merit. And also they need to somehow chip in. So it wasn't an inform to the commercial team, an inform to the technology team, an inform to the data team. It was consult. When we first launched, on stage was the director of loyalty, because membership, or director of membership, because that was really important. We're a member-owned business. The director of commercial, the food MD, the CMO, the chief technology officer has been involved, the chief data officer. So they all feel like they've got a vested interest in it. They all back it, and they've all helped build it. It's not a separate thing that they point at. It's something they've co-owned. And then in terms of professional relationships, I spend a lot of time keeping up to date with all our key interdependencies and making sure when I go to them, it isn't one-way traffic. It isn't I need this from you, I need that. I create social contracts. So for instance, with the buying team, there's three things that I usually speak to them about. One is alignment. We all know what each other's doing. So there's never a situation where the buyers are caught off guard by activity Corp Media Network is doing with the brands. The other is endorsement. So we endorse the retail strategy, the category strategies, the direction of the convenience business. They do the same for media, which means we both need to understand.
How does that practically work, just from a kind of governance point of view and just time, Dean?
Well, there's a lot of huddles, or they're called huddles. Other organisations might call them different things. So like team meetings, essentially. And these things are always looking for guest presenters, shared insights. And because our world's quite different and our industry is quite different, I think there's a lot of curiosity. But you have to spend the time to develop the deck, get on those agendas and make sure it's valuable for the other team. We share a lot of media insights that are customer insights versus category commercial insights. So they complement each other. So you have to find a way in to share those understandings and build that endorsement. And the last one, which is really important, I think, for trust, is protect. So we're going to make sure we don't cannibalize any trade investment, any supply side investment, and vice versa. That's in the those shopper world, which is the core and a lot of where retail media has come from. I suppose the other budgets like performance and brand are new territories. But that's the way we built solid foundations. And then when I get to infrastructure, that's your basics, your races, your governance, your processes. Because when retail media was the CEO's, this is important, right? That's going to have a ticking clock before it's not important and something else is important. So those other two things are really important before you, for long-term stability. And you see a lot of other retail media networks where they've lost that political significance, but they haven't had any foundations to then carry on being prioritized.
Yeah, we see that in a lot of places, and plenty where you would say, look, the way that you've set this up is just suboptimal, and it's going to be difficult for you to unpick it. And I really like the way that you've widely consulted across the business and given people a sense of ownership. But at the leadership level, that isn't always easy. Is there something inherent about the co-op that has meant that it's more collaborative inherently, or is it been just as difficult as it would be anywhere else, and it's the way that you've gone about it?
Well, cooperation is one of our cultures. We have a lot of leadership behaviours that are built around cooperation. I think where that becomes a risk is when you mistake cooperation for consensus, like you need everyone to agree. I think as human beings, as colleagues, as long as you feel heard, you can commit to something that you disagreed with, right? And I think cooperation that leads to commitment is really important for retail media, because you know how opinionated the different aspects of retail media can be. So cooperation means that people will always make time to be consulted. They won't go, stick to your swim lane, I don't care. Everyone's quite osmosis with information. We're not told to just stick to our own thing, and sharing knowledge, appreciating what other people's objectives are is really important. So I think that's helped, and that was really important in that 2023 lay the foundations year. What I actually did, which could be considered anti-cooperative in 2024, is I said that this year Corp Media Network needs to have a startup mentality. Go fast, go alone, and then if you want to go big, you go together. I think I've misquoted that, but the idea is if we're going to be out the blocks, we won't be able to consult on everything. And the only way that was actually made easier is that we're a B2B business at the end of the day. And I think whenever you're launching a B2C business, there's a lot more risk. There's a lot more governance around launching those things. So we got quite a bit of freedom, but that was only because of those seeds we planted in 2023 to go really fast in 24.
That's interesting. I mean, the other thing that to me is a standout about the co-op, and I guess yourself, is the thoughtfulness. And you've mentioned curiosity a few times. It's clearly a kind of inherent trait for yourself, but there's sort of three standout bits of research that I would really applaud. It almost goes to the heart of what do we have to show that our retail media network can do. Now, you're clearly not the biggest retailer, but you've got a lot of stores, and you've you've clearly thought about, well, if we could show a network effect, that the media in our stores has an impact on stores in and around, that must be a good thing. If we can show that when people come to us, they haven't made their mind up and they're very influenceable in store, that surely is going to be a good thing from a retail media point of view. And we're also small shops. So if we can show that a media intervention in a small shop has a kind of disproportionate impact versus a bigger one, that also ought to be good. So, I mean, there's a strategy behind that, but you don't see that I don't see that from the other networks in the same way. So where has that thoughtfulness and that preparedness to invest in, research isn't cheap. So where's that come from?
If you think about, there's potentially three ways you can create value, right? You can reframe your assets to different categories, to different buyers. You can elevate the perception of the value of those assets, or you can actually invest in the assets themselves and change the reality. And when we were planning to launch Court Media Network, we essentially took a big swing. We didn't go for the safe bet. The safe bet would have been, do what everyone else is doing. Just put your data into the market, put your media inventory into the market, follow the herd. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, in 2023, there was much differentiation between retail media networks. I think they all talked about products, not propositions. And when you looked at the right we had to win in retail media at the time, it was built around sales, market share, sales scale. Co-op was about 5%. So again, relatively low, 7th in grocery retail media. It was built around e-commerce traffic. Again, we were relatively immature in that, and we're quick commerce, mopeds, bicycles, low transaction value. We do a lot of business through Deliveroo, through Just Eat. Our own infrastructure was quite immature at that point in time. And then the other one was first-party data, loyalty data. And we had, I think, 4.5 million members at the time. We've got 7.5 now, versus the Tesco, the Nectars that are above 20. I think Boots was 19 at the time. So you looked at the balance sheet of retail media qualities, and we were never really going to win if we just said we're the same as everyone else with less stuff, right? And there was already a perception that we're a smaller shop versus a big store with a higher rate of sale. So we knew that we had to reframe how the market should think about retail media, which is not in terms of commercial assets, but in terms of media assets. And in media assets, we had a lot of value because we had a huge amount of reach geographically and in household penetration, huge amount of frequency. We were second in total transactions behind Tesco, 850 million transactions a year.
So basically, you've got millions of people shopping frequently, but for small baskets.
Yeah.
So in aggregate, you're smaller than Tesco or Sainsbury's, but in terms of the number of people, the absolute number of baskets, it's not that you're punching way above your weight.
Yeah, exactly. So if you reframe if retail media is a media channel, then it should be measured and appraised based on media attributes: reach, frequency, attention, context, how much shoppers can be influenced by media to make decisions. And then you go into the thought leadership studies. And one of the reasons we had to invest in those is, and I read a book that was quite influential in these decisions called Blue Ocean Strategy, which is, I don't know if you've read it. Yeah, it's about, if we were like for like anyone else, we're in the Red Sea, sharks all eating everything up. And then, but in the Blue Sea, if we go, well, convenience is entirely different and it's complementary and it can be a catalyst to all your media plans, that's great. But it's actually something that the market didn't appreciate as a positive. If you think about the two ways you can position yourself around an attribute that's already valued. I always use the example of Coors Light in beer for this. So Coors Light position themselves around cold, right? They don't do the cold bit. The bar does the cold bit. The supermarket fridge does the cold bit. The fridge at home does the cold bit. They had no right to own that. Any other beer brand can own cold, but it was a valued point of differentiation. So they just created a moat around it with their advertising. That's one way you can do it. The other way is you actually create a unique thing that only you can do. But then you have to prove that it's valuable. So that's why I invest in these studies, because everyone thought convenience wasn't that value. Smaller shops, less trade, buying less products. So we did Halo study that proved when you advertise in a co-op shop, we share our shoppers with everyone else. So when they see an ad in our store on a Wednesday and they do the big shop in a supermarket, it can influence both trips. And Circana measured that for us, and it was 5 times the incremental sales when you counted the rival stores as well as ours. Then we looked at Lumen, and because there's no navigation in convenience stores, there's no coffee aisle, biscuit aisle, people actually look at the ads to help them, oh, there's the biscuits.
So and they use it as a navigation aid.
Yeah, but it means they're looking at the ads for longer, which is important. And also when they're buying coffee, they see the biscuit ads. And because people get lost in a convenience store, they're walking up and down the same aisle twice. And because it's unplanned, it's impromptu, they also are looking for the media to go, help me make my mind up because I need to get out of here. So that was all compounding into visibility, attention, and then brand recall. And Lumen did that study for us, and we chose Lumen because they are actually the most reliable source of attention data, to the tune that media agencies use their data in their planning tools. So we chose Lumen purposely because they had a lot to lose if this study wasn't robust, if it wasn't credible. And it proved all these things to be true. And then with Trinity McQueen, we wanted to prove that because people shop in convenience with a different mindset versus a shopping list-driven supermarket shop, they're actually more open to brand switching, more open to brand trial. And that study proved that as well. And we've got another 3 in the pipeline. We're not going to stop because proposition and that belief in a proposition is the same way brands manage their proposition. No one in a consumer brand world goes, I've done my campaign in 2024, I don't need to go again, because everyone knows. You've got to constantly defend and promote your propositional difference. And that's what we did. And the same thing is true when we originally wrote our strategy in 2023 to now. Convenience is different. The scale of co-op provides unique advertising benefits, and co-op media network unlocks them. So it's convenience, scale, and execution. And that guides whether we install screens, it guides how we design our offsite media proposition. Everything is directed by that strategic discipline.
So if I think then about the people that have got to be influenced by that research and the people that your strategy is designed to influence, they sort of split into 2. There are the commercial teams that would be interfacing with your buying teams day in, day out, more or less, and then possibly their brand or media agency teams. Now, I grew up in that world, was with P&G, PepsiCo, and I think it's still the case that the commercial teams, even now, they're spending big sums of money, and almost certainly a big chunk of what you call retail media will be their JBP or supplier spend, however you call it. But the level of thinking, let's just call it that the supplier commercial teams put into how that money is spent or / measured, and I'll be polite here, we'll just call it variable, okay? And they're not media people.
Yeah.
And you're not going to land particularly a media argument with them. And in any event, if you did, they'd think, well, that's interesting, but I'm really only measured on the co-op, actually. So the fact that it's having a sales uplift elsewhere, or it's really working from a media point of view, that's a little bit lost on me. Are you with that? Because so then you say, okay, well, I'm not really trying to land that message with you. I'm trying to land it with your brand or your media team. Where how have you had to get that message into those brand or media agencies acting on behalf of brands?
Yeah, I think it's because the world was quite siloed. If you think about the industry dynamics were really set up for retail media. We had reducing, targeting, and data-driven from cookies, and this sort of pressure on performance and conversion. At the same time, retailers were really under pressure with operating margins and wanting to leverage their assets. So the industry was set up in supply and demand. But infrastructurally, there's all these silos in the way we operated, and they're still a problem today. I think the way we communicate it is, as a brand, you should have your marketing strategy, your 4 Ps, to put it basically. And the retail media, the promotion side of things, needs to be integrated into the others. It's not an us or them. It's not a which one should we do. You need to be in all the right distribution points. You need to be at the right price. You need to make sure your suite of products is curated for where you want to grow. And I think what we're seeing more of with the way that retail media is growing in significance with the agencies and the brand side is every brand has a growth strategy, right? And if you're stocked well everywhere, that isn't necessarily activating a growth strategy. You're not going to go, we're only going to be ranged in the stores that serve young people, or we're only going to be a lot of brands end up with broad distribution strategies because they have broad demand, but they need to be quite targeted in where they grow. And that's where retail media can really complement the category teams and not see it as another way that we could be spending money that isn't orientated around promotions or space or walk-in FSDUs or things like that. And I think knowing that you've got supply side investment and you've got demand side investment, and the demand side can act as a commercial catalyst is how we originally had those conversations. I think when you get into agency broader budgets like performance budgets and brand budgets, that's a different proposition entirely, really. Mm-hmm. And that's where the complexity of retail media has grown, because essentially retailers are fishing in multiple ponds mm-hmm. that require multiple propositions mm-hmm. with multiple dynamics behind mm-hmm. them. That's where the challenge really comes.
And then, as a, let's say, medium-sized retailer, you clearly aren't going to have the budgets that your colleagues or peers at, let's say, Nectar 360 or Tesco would have. And unlocking agency spend, that's not a walk in the park. That requires some investment. So there must have been a bit of a leap of faith within the business that spending time, effort, and therefore money on that would be worth it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things retailers that I've spoke to in the past, and it's the same overseas, is they always thought the agency income streams would be a lot easier than they are in reality. And they're difficult for two reasons. One is the standards are much higher mm-hmm. in speed, in access, in control, in performance, in accountability. Mm-hmm. And the other is you need to be able to operate in two markets with the same asset, because you've ultimately got the same data assets.
When you say two markets, Dean, what do you mean?
Well, the shopper media market
okay.
and the performance market, and those two are very different things. Mm-hmm. Usually the shopper media market is around, I want to catalyze my supply side investments as much as possible. There's a lot of promotion, there's a lot of MPD, there's a lot of mm-hmm. seasonal events. Mm-hmm. I want my products within Co-op to fly as a consequence of my supply side investments usually. And I see our role there as a commercial catalyst. The retail business comes first in that role, and it's a holistic benefit we're trying to drive. In the performance marketing budgets, what you see there is there's more market fluidity. Those agencies or those in-house performance teams are paid to find sales, and it doesn't have to happen with Co-op. It can happen anywhere in the market, and it doesn't have to happen with retail media. It can happen on Google. It can happen on Meta. It can happen on programmatic display. And they need to optimize where they place their bets with the budgets that their clients give them or their senior marketers give them. And that's where the money ultimately goes. So in that market, you are competing with other established media channels. You're competing with channels that are much maturer, so they're faster, they're more integrated, they're more understood. And this is where the fragmentation and standardization conversations come in to play a lot. And I think those two worlds with one team are quite challenging. And that's one of the strategic choices a retail media network has to make, is how do you do that?
Those agency performance budgets are, for the most part, digital, and they evolved out of Google and then Facebook and so on. And I can see how with your, say, quick commerce business, you would be looking to apply some of that. But you've got a big in-store business, and am I right in thinking that those sort of that performance buying hasn't found its way to in-store yet, or are you going to tell me different?
Well, the first thing that surprises a lot of people is in the definition of retail media, printed in store doesn't count. So it's not even...
But whose definition?
But the IAB's, ISBA's, overseas.
But doesn't that tell us more about the IAB than it does about retail media? Because it's good. It's a... I don't know your numbers, but I could bet you that it's a large percentage is in store. So you can't not call that.
Yeah, I think it's just it's probably difficult to actually manage and govern. And I think the IAB being internet advertising, probably a stem from that. There are other bodies that share similar definitions, and it's obviously more traceable, more trackable, I think, in terms of observing how the market grows and the dynamics of it. But it's still a huge part, and we activate printed campaigns against brand budgets and against some performance marketing budgets, even that. So because of the scale, because of the reach, because of where the audience and the context are. But yeah, our store is hugely important. It's where 90% of our sales take place. And I think in the entire industry, there's an imbalance between where investments go and where the shoppers are. And I think in most grocery markets around the world, bar Ricardo's and pure play players, the store is where the vast majority of those transactions happen, but online is where the vast majority of retail media pounds is spent. So this...
Well, I'm not sure that's true in the UK, actually. I think the vast majority of retail media is in-store, unless you define retail media, as some do, as, internet advertising.
Yeah, if you exclude the print.
Then, of course, which is just a bit weird.
Yeah, if you exclude the print, it's way over-invested. If you include the print, then it's probably more balanced. But you got in America, obviously, that printed channel doesn't really exist as much as it does over here, which is why the digitization is so important in those overseas markets.
Yeah.
But yeah, for us, the store...
But presumably here also, and arguably bigger here, because they've always been a thing in the way that they weren't a thing so much in the in the US. But here you've got this huge legacy spend of money that goes essentially on cardboard.
Yeah.
It's point of sale on the fixture on the gondola end, and it goes up every 4 weeks and it comes off every 4 weeks. But it does raise big sums of money. It's effective.
Yeah.
And now that is being digitized.
Yeah.
And perhaps tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about that world.
Well, in that, so when I always draw to comparisons if you think about where America came from with retail media, it was sponsored search to begin with, because they didn't have the printed shopper marketing that we've always had. So they've come from a world of one-to-one channels, right? So their expectation of the store...
They had it. Interestingly, I was on the board of the joint venture, the one was at Dunnhumby with Kroger. And I think the thing that people don't quite often get as to why is in-store so much bigger in Europe than it evolved to be in the US is simply because of the balance of power. Even Kroger only had about, I don't know, at the time, 7 or 8% national share. It was only Walmart who had a double digit. So the retailers, in the great scheme of things in the US, because very, very regionalized, had no real market power. The market power is with the suppliers.
Yeah.
And, Kroger used to say to us, look, we will go with the Coke or the Pepsi promotion and we'll look to make it as effective as we can. But so there was always cardboard that was coming from Coke or Pepsi it was very supplier driven, which is how it used to be here, interestingly. I'm old enough to remember that. But it's that market power thing that's changed it. And retailers have been able to extract disproportionate amounts of monies from suppliers because of their market share.
Yeah, there's loads. It's really interesting because when you look at there's the power, there's also the geography of getting stuff to each of the stores over a broad landscape. There's G-SCOP regulations over here and the slotting fees and listing fees and the dynamics there. But yeah, there's loads of reasons why it's different, but the causes of those are how we end up with different expectations. So when a screen is in a shop, in an American supermarket or convenience retailer, one-to-one measurement and one-to-one targeting is what is they want to turn the store into a website. Mm-hmm. Over here, one-to-many is accepted as a effective and efficient channel, and you don't need the sensors on top of the screens to know did they look at. You just measure the target versus control stores and do incremental sales like that, and that's why I think the in-store opportunity is more understood, and I think it's going to be easier to integrate into plans here than potentially over the other side of the pond.
And then thinking about putting ourselves in the shoes of a brand. And we want to grow our market share within the co-op. Now you've made available, a wide array of media opportunities, choices, propositions that we can use to do that. But 90% of my business is going through the shops.
Yeah.
The thing that I really want to get right first and foremost is my distribution and my physical availability, as the marketing science would refer to it. And then if I can, make my mental availability kind of kick in, happy days. I've got the two working together. But that's, that organizationally is difficult for everybody. But if you get it right, it can be happy days. How do you try and get that balance between what happens in store and what happens from a media point of view working together?
It's that if we go back to that alignment, one of those 3 commitments with the commercial team in alignment, it's that, because it is not easy. We do it well in the UK, those sort of activating in the store, activating in media. But there's so many cogs. There's promotional plans, there's ranging plans, there's store refits, there's even simple things like, have the fridge doors changed from sliding to opening, and can the media go on and off? If you're rolling out electronic shelf edge labels, which stores can still have a printed barker and which ones can't? So the complexity of managing in-store execution of media alongside all the commercial decisions, all the format decisions, is not an easy one, but you need to be joint at the hip. You also need other teams, when they're working on things, to go, I think that's going to impact Co-op Media Network. I'm going to let them know. So that alignment and orchestration internally is so important, but you have to have broad education. You have to have a really open dialogue, and you need to have it in a way that doesn't drain loads of people's time.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Clearly, something you've got right, and we see day to day that not being right in many businesses. I won't bore you with the tales, but just want to move on a little bit, because one of the other fascinating things about retail media, is the number of kind of channels it straddles. Obviously, in store, huge, especially for yourselves, but you've got e-com. You've touched on loyalty, CRM. There's sort of offsite media. We talked a little bit about sort of store specific media earlier. And in all of those areas, there's different vendors, and every day seemingly there's some innovation or some new vendor. Or how do you kind of keep abreast of what's there today and what's coming, and the need to sort of run the network and do the day job, because you probably could spend all day and every day just talking to vendors. Yeah,
and in the early couple of years of Co-op Media Network, I had an approach of hear everyone out and listen and absorb and be curious, and because you didn't know what you didn't know, right? You couldn't assume that you knew everything about everything. And I think those conversations across on-site, off-site, screens, the store, all the sort of enabling tech that you can have, that was the time to be curious. I think as you get a bit more confident in what's out there and also what you need and what you've already got, I am saying no to more conversations. And I'm also leaning on partners to help me with that. So SMG are obviously a leading party in the retail media industry within the United Kingdom, and they're over in the States as well. So we have a dedicated innovation lead with SMG, and they help us shortlist, check, because they'll have had a lot of these conversations. Because if you met everyone and gave everyone 30 minutes to an hour, you'd run out. Yeah. The other thing is there is a lot of new stuff that's out there, and there's a lot of competing stuff. Mm-hmm. So I take a viewpoint about being quite honest around who we've already got and how long we've committed to a contract for, because that then is like, maybe in 2 years, but not now. Or I'll go, this isn't of interest currently, but come back in 4 months when we've got some headspace. Because there'll be moments in your calendar when you are open to being curious, and there'll be moments when you've got to focus on your clients, you've got to focus on planning, and you've got to focus on strategy. So yeah, it's not an all-on curiosity like it used to be. But I have noticed there's more vendors, not less.
It's incessant, that's right.
But I think that's true. If you've got any industry that's high growth, high margin, you're going to get a lot of investment into tech that enables, tech that optimizes, tech that accelerates, and you've got to make a vested interest on what adds and what subtracts, because this all costs money and you need to make sure it complements. But also for us, what's strategically aligned, and not all the things we've had are strategically aligned to where we want to go.
And do you get a free pass on what solutions you believe are right, or does the broader business have a point of view on that?
I think the one thing that I don't have a free pass, but I think what a retailer is used to is risk aversity. So as margins tend to be lower, you need to have high confidence in any big investments. So you usually, if you're rolling out any innovations to a store, it's let's put it in 5 stores, let's evaluate. Let's put it in 50, let's evaluate. Let's put it in 500, and you'll sense check that, because if you make a mistake, the margin is, you're going to have to generate a lot of consumer sales to make up for that. In retail media, because it was high growth, because it was higher margin, that meant you could take bigger risks and you could accelerate quicker. You could invest in technology, and if it didn't work, it wasn't the end of the business, if that made sense. So you were permitted to roll the dice a little bit more. As long as it wasn't what Jeff Bezos calls a one-way door, where you're in a dead end for a long period of time. So we're more open to proof of concepts, more open to scaled paced rollout. For instance, our digital screens, we went from 1 in October 24 to 1,000 in October 25. Now that would not have happened outside of retail media. Those screens would not have gone in the ground with a retailer-only business case, especially not that quickly. So there's some examples, but you still have to have robustness on, have you got the right partners? Have you got the right price if it's a vendor? And are they a right cultural fit, for instance, for the co-op? But I think speed and risk-taking goes up a little bit because the dynamics financially support it.
When you think about running the retail media network, you've got a vast diversity of skills. You need proposition people, you need sales people, and you need different people talking to big suppliers than small suppliers, and different people again talking to media agencies. And then ads have got to be made to happen. Things have got to work, and then it all has to be measured. And then you have to align with the business, whether that's e-com, retail, as we've talked. So a lot of different people skills required. You've mentioned SMG; they're clearly an integral partner, and I mean key to your success. So you've obviously thought about what we should outsource, but if I'm right in thinking, not the entirety of the co-op media network is outsourced. Clearly, you're a co-op employee, for example. How do you think about what we should do ourselves versus what should we outsource?
SMG, 10 years of SMG, and they are a key strategic partner. They are quoted a lot of times within our GNFR, our Goods Not for Resale conference. I think we work with 2,500 goods not for resales, and your Microsofts, your those sort of companies, and they are touted as one of what strategic partnership looks like. So they lean in a lot, and that was quite evident during cyber, where they lent in to that challenge. They didn't move away, and some suppliers did go in, we'll unplug everything. We don't want our cyber attack, and SMG lent in. So first thing is they are a fantastic partner, and any capabilities that they have, we usually adopt. It's where the capabilities they might not have yet. So for instance, when we appointed LiveRamp, clean data collaboration, that was a capability that SMG didn't have at the time, so we outsourced it. So they're usually the things as I mentioned, SMG have dedicated innovation support for us. So they actually have quite an impartial approach. So if they can't do something, they'll help us find the right capability and make sure it plugs in effectively. And I think that's quite unique, because usually some sales houses around the world, they'll have the sales team and the campaign delivery team, but they might not have the wrapper around, well, how can we help you build a holistic ecosystem, even if some aspects of it don't directly impact us? So that's the first and foremost. They are pivotal role, and they are long-standing role, and that relationship's going to continue. And then where there's gaps, we have those conversations.
Yeah, because in the major UK retail networks have evolved differently, and some of the big retailers do it all themselves, and some outsource some or all. And I'm just wondering how, and what I would, I think is a fair observation. In all cases, there's a lot of people involved. You can't do all the things that we've described. It's not there to be automated. Or is that something that we're going to see, do you think? Do you think that there will be perhaps fewer, more productive people in 5 years' time than there are today, or quite the reverse? No, we're going to need more people because of the way that it's growing.
I'll touch on one point before I go that about SMG, because I should have mentioned it, was at Co-op, no one knows who's Co-op and SMG. So if you were speaking to the buyers and you said which one is SMG, which they wouldn't know, and that's purposeful. So everyone's Co-op Media Network. So everyone's sat in the office together. You'll find that the SMG colleagues that work on Co-op Media Network, if you go on their LinkedIn page, it'll say they work for Co-op Media Network.
Yeah.
So they're fully integrated. So when you mention outsource, our teams don't actually feel that. It's like one connected team.
Interesting.
When we launched Co-op Media Network, so we used to work with SMG when they were called Threefold, their sales outside of the business. They're now just SMG. They didn't work in our office. They worked out, and we brought them in, and we restructured the floor plan. So we sat next to the buyers and next to the marketing team. So I know you on a piece of paper, it's outsourced. The reality, it does not feel like that.
Operationally,
we have the same
it's
team
seamless
meetings.
operationally.
There's not we have a Co-op meeting and then we invite the SMG colleagues in. We're one Co-op Media Network. So that's a huge benefit and a huge cultural shift that we had, which I think has drove to a lot of the successes we had. And then when you think about AI and people and teams and talent, I think people will do different stuff, but I think you'll still need a lot of talent, especially over the next few years during the change and the expansion and the increased complexity. I think there'll be probably 3 areas of technology evolution we'll see in retail media. I think one will be aggregation. So I think you've already seen that. I think before Cannes this year, we had dunnhumby launch an alliance which has different retail media networks plugged in. On-site, I think, is the first channel that they support. And then SMG launched their retail media exchange, which orientates initially around digital store. And the same is plugging in all these inventory. So buyers in the market, particularly those performance marketing agencies or those performance marketing pounds, can access. So I think that's going to create new roles, I think, for managing it and developing it and making sure everyone's plumbed in. And there's going to be years of optimizing behind that. And those things didn't exist. So anyone on the supply side is going to need to figure out how that works. It's a totally different model.
I was going to ask you about these early stage alliances, Dean, because there's an alluring thought that if you team up with the sort of the bigger retailers, bigger retail media networks, you might get a sort of, a bigger share of the collective pie. But you've obviously got to, that could go the other way too. And, monies that you've sort of worked hard to capture yourselves, you don't really want those going to Asda and Morrison's, for example, if you're on the one hand competing with them.
No, and this area really interesting. I love strategic problems and strategic choices, and some of these are big. So if you think about supporting that commercial catalyst role, I think that'll be very hard to automate within a platform because of all the complexities we talked about and the realities of ever-changing retail decisions, promo, price, ranging, all that. I think that'll be very hard to create a platform for. But the performance marketing budgets almost warrant it because they want speed, they want ease, they want comparability because they're buying across the market. And I think the buy side proposition there is very strong because it's giving all the performance marketer budgets what they want, which is that frictionless, comparable environment. But from a retailer point of view, you might have 2 schools of thought. One is you look back at what happened with digital display when the same thing happened and all these thousands of websites that had ad inventory and audience inventory to offer. Well, agencies aren't going to have 1,000 conversations, so they had to plug in to an aggregator platform, be it the Trade Desk or Stack Adapt or those sort of things. And what what they then lost was pricing control, client relationships, and differentiation, because they weren't seen as their websites. They were seen as ad inventory and audience inventory.
Yep.
So when retailers are looking at these other aggregate platforms, are they thinking the same thing's going to happen, or are they thinking it's going to be different and it's going to be beneficial? And can they also play in multiple markets at the same time? Can they be in the aggregator market and also in an agency model for other things? And can they have the full service model for everything else? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out more from the supply side. I think the proposition is very strong from the other side of the fence, but ultimately retailers that join that are going to end up bringing down some of the walled gardens that they sit behind. And if the market consolidates, that might be because they have to, because if they don't make a agency or a brand shortlist, they're not going to be in the meeting room. They're not going to be able to have that relationship, that sales relationship, that media partner relationship. So they might have to plug into this aggregate platform in the same way those smaller websites had to. So yeah, I'm really curious about how it'll pan out and also how retailers make their decisions.
It's going to be fascinating because there's so many different dimensions to it, because the two networks, if we can loosely use that term, that are emerging are really led by the sellers of the respective media, as opposed to being, say, technology enabled. And it would feel as a brand that I'm possibly just got a better watch, that I'm not going to be overpaying here for what I could have more easily done by some other method. And I think there's going to be I know that there is a lot of innovation in how do brands, agencies, deploy media widely and easily across retail media networks. How they do that, whether that's through an alliance or through technology, there's going to be a lot of innovation.
There'll be a lot, and obviously there'll be what are we paying and what do we get? They're the two things.
Exactly.
And what brands are potentially going to do is, I might be buying retail media assets through my shopper team, through my performance teams or my agencies, and through my brand budgets or my digital out-of-home agencies. And they might go, what does that look like in terms of what I pay and what I get? And this is where you need to have, integrity and fairness as a retail media network. You need to make sure that you look after your strongest clients and they're not paying a hit, high over here and low over here for the same asset. And that is quite tricky to manage if you're in aggregate markets or if in platform-based buys. But I think if the retail side incentives align and we strategically figure it out, it's better for the industry that you can buy with more transparency, with more comparability. It's just not losing that differentiation that, for instance, Co-op cares about, because we consider a convenience audience different to a supermarket audience. However, you might still be buying the same brands. And we believe that those things should be differentiated because the why is different, the how is different, even if the what isn't.
No, that's fascinating. I kind of feel that we could talk at length about this, and probably just kind of mindful of time. But let's just stick with that sort of crystal ball, sort of futuristic side of things. And let me ask you if there are propositions, technologies that you're very excited about, that you've seen, that you perhaps can tell us a bit about?
Well, I'll get so we've talked about aggregator platforms that I think are going to have a much bigger role in the industry. I think there's two other technology, and then I'll give one strategic one as well that I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out. So the second technology one would be orchestration platforms, I think. So there was this view of, will there be a jack of all trades that can do on-site, off-site, digital screens in store, or will we have specialists? And I think the belief I have is that you'll end up with specialisms, right, that then need to be glued together. And at the minute, there isn't a way effectively of gluing everything together. So
wouldn't the sort of Osmoses and Vantages and retail media tools say that's what they've evolved their platforms to do?
No one's nailed it. Everyone's tried to do it, but there's no standardized approach. The omni-channel unified way of targeting and measuring, especially with attribution included. So if you imagine, a shopper I'll think of another industry like the health and beauty sector. They see a product on social. They research it using an AI agent. They walk into a store and see an ad, and then they buy it online.
Yep.
That's what the industry expects.
Yes.
Attribution and orchestration to happen, right? That doesn't exist, but it's the panacea that we're striving for. So I think there'll be orchestration platforms. They have the ability to target, the ability to activate, and the ability to attribute and measure together. Those things I think will emerge.
Okay.
There's not going to be a light switch moment where you can't do it today and you can do it tomorrow. There'll be step-by-step incremental value added is what I believe. And then the third, so we've got aggregated platforms, orchestration, and then the third one I think is the role of AI in the shopping experience and how that impacts retail media. So for instance, there may be on e-commerce, on on-site propositions, you may have, I'm cooking a barbecue this weekend, can you create a custom-built shopping list? And there'll be sponsored products in the answer rather than you do that all yourself. Rather than it might, I don't know if you're going to get the chat GPT compare, or here's my shopping list from last week. Can you tell me where I can find the most value for products across all the different grocery networks? Those sort of things are going to be quite tricky to do. But AI is an enabler within retail media networks for shopper experience and for faster, more efficient processes. That I think that will be an emerging capability. SMG have got smart planning, smart evaluations already in their pipeline and being trialed now, for instance, to support us with that. And then the strategic one, I think, is when the market consolidates, I think there'll be a portfolio-based approach from...
When you say consolidates, Dean, do you mean the tech vendors consolidate or somehow the retail media networks consolidate?
Buyers will decide on the market budgets how they spend their money. And at the minute, you've got rising expectations against falling resources, right? So what that ultimately means is that there's going to be retail media networks on a VIP list, and there'll be retail media networks that are forced to queue outside, right? And some are going to make the list and some aren't. And I think the way that I'll call it the buy side, so brands and agencies will create a portfolio is around rocks, pebbles, and sand. So your rocks are your big, scalable partners, your the bedrock of most of your media plans, right? They'll be the go-to because they have...
Are you thinking now media holistically, Dean, not as opposed to within retail media?
No, retail media networks.
So, well, you're going to start with Tesco then, aren't you?
Well, Amazon and potentially your Tesco's, depending on your brand. Like each agency is going to need its roster it goes to, depending on what type of brand it has. So obviously, you might not have a grocery brand, you might have another, but it needs a roster of retail media networks. It needs to understand their differentiation, their value, their scale, to then say, well, what is most effective for this new client we've just won, or for this client we're going to grow? And you'll have, your rocks, and then your pebbles are your specialists. So they might be able to unlock a certain audience or a certain media inventory or a certain context. And those are the catalysts to your briefs. Importantly, if you're in that world, you have to be complementary to those big scalable partners. Can't be something they already do and you do it to a smaller scale but in a focused capacity. And then there's your sandwiches, your extensions, your cost-effective way of reaching those audiences. And I see it as, in the way TV used to be bought, you'd buy, your rocks would be your I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, your X Factor. Your pebbles might be your second tier programs, but then you'd have, sometimes you're at a appear at 2 a.m. under Homes by the Hammer reruns, right? Yeah. That inventory gets served.
And it was very cheap and you could have a lot of it.
Yeah. So that I think at the minute, there's no real shortlist or curated way strategically that those portfolios are being built. And I think what that will give rise to is retail media networks will have to create propositions, differentiate propositions that they hang their hat on. And we've seen some come through. We're obviously convenience. There's some on creativity. There's some on omnichannel. There's some on measurement. There's some on targeting. There's some on audiences. And I think when the dust settles, buyers within the retail media market, your brands, your agencies, are going to need to easily say, when do I use different retail media networks for different clients, for different briefs? And I think that, to me, is an interesting evolution of retail media.
Fascinating. We could talk for hours. Maybe you're going to have to come back in a couple of years and tell us how it's all panned out, Dean. But really, really enjoyed the chat. Thanks so much for coming on, and onwards and upwards.
No, loved it. Thank you, Steve.
You're very welcome. Yeah, cheers.